I'm about to show you the best bolognese you will ever eat. Marcella Hazan's bolognese recipe is, and I grew up in a family that was obsessed with spaghetti.
Everyone's favorite dish.
She makes hers with tagliatelle. I have the attachment for fettuccine, which is like a pretty similar size of noodle. So I'm gonna be making homemade noodles with mine. Links to all the recipes will be in the description, but you can actually watch me make it and maybe it'll give you guys the confidence to make delicious homemade pasta as well. I typically like to make this on a Sunday where I know I'm gonna be home for a few hours. It does take quite a bit of time to let all the juices marinate, but trust me when I say it is well worth it and it will absolutely wow all of your guests at dinner. I'm going to start off by showing you the ingredients list and then we'll get on to the cooking. By the way, if you hear lots of banging in the background, don't worry about that. We have our contractor here for the first time and they're starting to pull off panels on the outside of our house to see just how badly our foundation is sinking and what we need to do. I'll talk about that in a different video. But you're going to want a couple tablespoons of olive oil, 8 tablespoons of unsalted butter, 1 cup of chopped onion, 1 1/3 cups of chopped celery, 1 1/3 cups of chopped carrot, about a pound of chuck, or you could do a 1/2 pound of chuck and a 1/2 pound of veal with about a 1/2 pound of ground pork. Unfortunately, our butcher was out of ground pork this time around, and the grocery was out of ground pork, and I didn't see any veal. So we're just doing a 1.5 pounds of chuck altogether. It's still going to be delicious. 2 cups of whole milk, 2 cups of dry white wine, kosher salt, freshly ground black pepper, 1/8 of a teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg or a pinch of ground nutmeg. I already have ground nutmeg on my shelf, so that's just what we're using. 3 cups of imported San Marzano tomatoes, basically Italian plum tomatoes with their juices. About a pound of tagliatelle, and I'll go through that whole recipe separately. And you definitely want some freshly grated Parmigiano Reggiano. Oh, I'm mispronouncing that. Parmigiano Reggiano? Parmesan. For your homemade pasta, I like to use the Love and Lemons recipe. So I use 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 3 large eggs, 1/2 teaspoon of sea salt, 1/2 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. And then I kind of eyeball it after that. If I find that it's like a little dry, I can always wet my hands and add a sprinkling of water. Or if I found I used like small eggs, I can always throw in an extra small egg, especially because my birds are little, so they lay little eggs. Or if it's too wet, you can always add more flour. I personally like to pre-chop everything and get as much as possible measured out just so that everything's ready to go and I don't have to think about it or reference the recipe quite as often. Now, if you have a big Dutch oven like this one, this is a really good tool to making your pasta. So I'm gonna melt 6 tablespoons of butter and I'm gonna add in 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Let that butter melt until it stops foaming. From there, you wanna toss in your chopped onion and stir it until it's softened, about 5 minutes. Throw in your celery, throw in your carrot, coat them, stir them, let it cook for a couple minutes. And after that, you can add your meat with a very healthy pinch of kosher salt and freshly ground black pepper. Let the meat just lose its red color. So you don't need to like crisp it up or anything like that. If you find there's a lot of fat at the bottom, you can always pour some of that out. Reduce the heat to low and pour in 2 cups of your whole milk. Let it simmer and you want to stir it frequently for about an hour. So you want to make sure it's not burning or doing anything weird, right? From there, you can stir in your 1/4 teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg and 2 cups of dry wine. And again, let that simmer down. Might take about another hour or so. After it's all evaporated, you can add in your can of tomatoes. I like to kind of crush it up with a spoon a little bit, get those big tomatoes like into smaller chunks. And then you want to turn it down as low as possible. So basically you want just like the tiniest little bubble popping once in a while, but you really don't want it like more than that. You're gonna cook that uncovered for 3 hours. You wanna check on it once in a while, make sure it's not over bubbling, make sure it's not too much evaporated. If you find that the sauce starts to stick to the bottom of the pan at all, or it's like scorching, you can always add about a 1/2 cup of water. It's like a slow cook. You wanna let it marinate in all those juices, stay nice and warm. When the water is like pretty much all evaporated and the oil is kind of separated from the sauce a little bit, that's when it's time to taste test. If it's feeling a little bland, add a little more salt. Your last couple tablespoons of butter, you're gonna reserve for the pasta. So let's move on to the pasta next. About an hour before you're ready to eat. That's around the time you want to start thinking about your pasta. The Love and Lemons recipe is awesome, but I did read up on some extra tips specific to tagliatelle that might be helpful. Maybe it's just like another perspective on pasta. I'm not really sure. So we're going to like incorporate those into this video. The other thing is the Love and Lemons recipe does not utilize the KitchenAid to mix and knead. And I do use the KitchenAid to mix and knead. I actually put the flour directly into the KitchenAid. I make a little well. That's when I put in my eggs, salt, and oil. And I use the mixing attachment, gently mix that all up. Once there's no dry bits on the side, I will then switch it out to the dough kneader. And I let that baby go on setting 2 for like a few minutes. I kind of eyeball it. Like, it's not gonna be a perfect ball. I might kind of take it off the hook after that, knead it a bit with my hands and see if like it can actually form into that nice ball shape. If the dough seems too dry, you can sprinkle a bit of water. You can even use an extra egg. If it feels too wet, you can always add a little bit more flour. But you want to shape it into a ball, wrap it up in plastic wrap, and let it sit for like 30 minutes. You can go up to 3 hours, so you can always like make it ahead of time. You just have to pop it in the fridge. Dust a couple baking sheets with flour. That way, when you're working with the long pieces of dough that have been stretched out, you have like a place to put them where it's not going to get really sticky. And here is where different recipes have slightly different tactics. Once you're ready to work with the dough, once it's sat, as long as it needs to sit, that's when you cut it into 4 sections and you'll be working with each one separately. At that point, I'll often freeze 2 of the sections because my family won't necessarily go through all that pasta. So I'll usually like flour them a little bit and then put them in separate little baggies and pop it in the freezer. With the pieces that I'm going to be using, I will mold them into rectangles. From there, I'm going to run it through the pasta roller attachment 3 times on level 1. So this is where my technique diverges a little bit from this recipe. You can kind of fold up the dough, and different people have different like techniques on how to fold it, but you can like fold it in half, or you can fold it in thirds, or you can fold it in thirds and fold it in half, and you run it through again. And that way it basically makes your long ribbon, once it's all done, longer, I think, and skinnier. So you have longer noodles. Some people have you do this once, some people have you do it 3 times, some people have you do it no times. The other thing that it can do is it really like activates the gluten by folding it, running it through, folding it, running it through. And so you do that a few times on the widest setting. From there, you want to start thinning out your sheet. So you go in setting 2, you run it through. Love and Lemon says to do it a few times. Other recipes say to do it twice. Some recipes say only do it once on each setting. You go to level 3, you run it through. You go to level 4, you run it through. Now, depending on what kind of pasta you're trying to make, will tell you what level to end at. Love and Lemons, I think they're mostly referencing like spaghetti. I think they go up to level 6. I think the super fine levels like 8 and 9, depending on which attachment you're using, those are really more for like the raviolis or anything that you're going to be folding up, tortellini, that sort of thing. For tagliatelle, the recipe I read said to stop at level 5 on the KitchenAid. From there, you then pick your cutting attachment. Raw tagliatelle should be about 7 millimeters wide. Fettuccine is like 6.5 millimeters wide. We're just gonna use the fettuccine attachment. It's close enough for what we're going for. So I have this long, beautiful sheet. Here's another place where what I've read and the research I've done diverges slightly from the Love and Lemons recipe. They actually say to let that sit and dry a little bit for like at least 15 minutes. I believe the reason for that is that if it's a little bit drier, it's a little less sticky and the noodles are less likely to clump together. That's my understanding. They didn't really give a good explanation for it, but I have seen some recipes do that. You do want to flour very lightly both sides of that ribbon sheet. Let it sit for 15 minutes. Or not. I mean, I did a bunch of times where I didn't and it was perfectly fine. Noodles were maybe a little stickier than usual. And then you run it through, catching it as it runs through. And then you do have the option to let that dry further if you want, especially if you want to save some for another day. But generally speaking, you should use fresh pasta like within a reasonable time frame. Boil some water, throw about a tablespoon of salt in that boiling water. Only need to cook it for like a minute. And then from there, put it back into the pasta pot. Put it back into the pasta pot and then throw your last 2 tablespoons of butter in with that pasta. If you've frozen half of the dough for the noodles, you only have a half pound of pasta. So that means you would only put in 1 tablespoon of the butter. I also like to take half of my sauce, cool it, and freeze it. So now I'm working with half the sauce, half the noodles. That's when I combine it up, add my cheese, and I serve it with fresh basil. It is by far the best pasta you will ever have. If you do end up trying these recipes or any part of them, please comment. Like, let me know your experience with it, how you found it, whether you have any tips or tricks. I'm sure the other viewers would love to see that as well. Also, if you guys have any requests for other recipes that you'd like me to try, let me know and I'll definitely give them a go, especially with my new pasta maker. I have both the 3-part attachment and the 5-part attachment, so there's lots of variations that I can make. And of course, be sure to subscribe for more awesome homesteady, farmy videos.